So good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm very, very glad to see you today. So welcome to our Books for School conference. It's our second day today, and I'm absolutely sure that you will have a lot of discoveries. So today we are going to have four fantastic speakers and well, four fantastic presentations, very hands-on and very insightful. And let me introduce our first speaker. So this is Christopher Vasiliou. Sorry, Christopher, if I mispronounced.
Perfect. You nailed it.
Okay, thank you. So Christopher was born in Massachusetts, the USA, and he completed his bachelor's degree in English literature and his master's degree in developmental and learning disabilities. He has extensive experience in teaching English as a foreign language at all levels. Yeah, and Christopher is currently working for Publications as an ELT consultant and teacher trainer. Christopher has delivered seminars across the world in Asia, in Europe, and in Latin America and in Russia. Yeah, and actually, so Chris, we're very happy to see you again as our guest speaker. Yeah, and Christopher's talk is about how to build 21st century competences. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind intro, and it's my pleasure also. First of all, I would like to thank you also for attending this session, and hopefully it's gonna be one of the last ones, let's say, for this coming year. Okay, unfortunately we still have to do the webinars and the online virtual presentations, but hopefully we're gonna swap back to normal as soon as possible and be able to conduct a lot of the seminars without really actually depriving of this wonderful treat that technology is giving us right now. Because okay, this is actually, I was thinking about this talk, and I consider that the era and what it is that we're experiencing right now is the perfect example that is can set the lead for this presentation and the basis of the 21st century competencies and why they are to be developed. So thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen, my PowerPoint presentation. Of course, we can interact via the chat box. I can see that you have sent in your hellos. Hello, Maria. Hello. I can't really read the Russian, unfortunately, but it's Olga, I think, something like that. So hello there. You have found the one spot through which we can interact, which is by sending in your questions or your ideas on the question box. But also, I mean, we can also do it, of course, if it is something that you are really eager to ask and would like to go forward with it. Yes, we can leave, if time allows, because it's a very brief session, for let's say 5 brief Q&A minutes of our talk. So let me, hello everybody. So let me carry on by sharing my screen. Okay, whoop. Yep, I need to make this swap here. Great. And let's see. Okay. I'm gonna share my screen right now. I'm just gonna be looking at your comment box if you can actually see my screen. I assume you can see it, but give me a thumbs up on the chat box if you can actually see the screen, my PowerPoint presentation right now. Is it okay? Can everybody see the logo? Exactly. Okay, great. Thank you. So let me start off, since you're already familiar with what it is that we're going to be talking about the course of this session. It is the 21st century competencies, and the question is, why are they and how do we put them into practice in the classroom setting, which is the most challenging thing for us teachers, okay? Apart from the theory, to see how we can actually practice what we preach and put it into practice as to fit in the typical 45, 50, 1 hour minute lesson that we are conducting. So let's go on with by me asking you, what are the 21st century competencies? In other words, what is it that comes to your mind when you hear 21st century competencies? I'm pretty sure some of you might be familiar with it. Some of you, it might be something quite new, or that you haven't heard of, or you haven't heard of how they can be applied in a classroom setting. Maria says the 4 C's, as brief and at the same time as concise, but also quite to the point, I'd say. Flexibility and the soft skills, like Larissa mentions, incorporating programming and digital competences, soft and hard skills, yes. And in general, yes, exactly. This is what I wanted to see. I mean, what is it that comes to your mind briefly when you hear about the 21st century competencies? And you're not far away from the truth, due to the fact that this is actually what the 21st century competencies stand for. A set of abilities that students need to acquire in order to be able to be in accordance with the requirements that have been set in this information age and the ongoing changes, challenges that we are facing. So who developed these competencies right now? So you can see I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible. Unfortunately, if we're not in a common setting in order to make it real live interactive. However, through the chat box, this at least gives us the opportunity to get some of your responses. Yes, guided teaching methods is one of the responses regarding the previous one: critical thinking, creativity, and global awareness. Yeah. Now, who developed these competencies? Who do you think is behind these competencies? Did we just wake up one day there at the dawn of the 21st century, because we were already counting 20 years since the dawn of the 21st century, and we decided, okay, we need to label this, we got to come up with something flashy, something sleeky that's gonna really be impressed? The government is one response, yes. Life itself, not quite far, but there are always some pioneers who are behind developments, right? Even life itself needs some boost in order to need some uh, people that actually are taking the initiative in order to guide forward our life. So yes, modern life as it is, definitely, but there's always somebody who is actually pushing that stone and is serves as a pioneer in order to develop things. The age of information, and actually in order to be and personalize it a bit more, I would say that yes, it has to do with all these advances that have taken place, but who is actually monitoring what is going on has to do with environments that students first of all encounter, especially in the first years, which is first of all the teachers, us teachers. Of course, teachers go hand in hand with the education experts, as you mentioned. Some of you mentioned the government. So education, a lot of the education experts are based in the ministries of education worldwide. So there is, of course, important input coming in from them as well, but also the people, the class who is responsible, and the people who are responsible for the ongoing situation right now, and they are able to see and foresee the changes that are taking place. And of course, it has to do with the people who are going to be employing, who are going to be taking it, enrolling into their businesses, the students of today, who will be the employees and employers, and why not business leaders, of tomorrow. So these competencies have been developed by this combination of people who are aware of what is the current situation, what are the current needs, and are able to detect what are the needs that are being created and are in progress. Now, question, okay, these changes came up. Why is there a change? Why do you think we have had the opportunity to go through these changes? Who we said about who developed from which people, from who these developments came into practice, who put this input. But the question is, why did we wake up one day and decided that we need to make some alternations in the, let's say, 20th century school setting? Well, first of all, it's more obvious than ever that we live in a globalized world. A lot of the economies depend upon each other. And of course, traveling has become much more easier than ever before. It has been, there are so many airlines, right? Right now. So this is one proof, one way of indicating that the world has become a much more of a smaller place. But also, what also has indicated the reason for these changes is technology itself, as you mentioned before in some of your comments. And yes, we are undergoing constant changes, and actually, in order to be in accordance with what I mentioned before, what we are facing right now with the pandemic is purely an opportunity to see how we can how our lives can drastically change from 1 minute to another, literally, by having to make some changes. And guess what, those this rapid change that happened to exist right now has a lot to rely on the ICT and the development of information and communication technologies. Of course, if we are to think about it, yes, as you mentioned, life is changing. And of course, there is a need for many more um, professions that did not exist before. So this means that the school setting sometimes prepares students for um, jobs that do not really exist even in the market right now. I mean, apart from, let's say, what we have experienced right now with the pandemic, which means that even the most illiterate of us teachers regarding technology have now become tech savvy and all of a sudden, and of course become acquainted with all these platforms through which we are able to carry out our lesson. Those of us who have not ever taught online had to all of a sudden become familiar with online teaching. So this is something that came all of a sudden, and it is real proof of what is it that we have to go through even right now as we are speaking. Of course, there are many careers that do not necessarily have to do with the business world. It can be like some simple hobbies that can turn out, why not, into professions of the future. So this is something quite interesting regarding the 21st century competencies, in that to what extent we actually have to consider not only the typical school setting and what is the knowledge that our students gain from the typical classroom setting, but also how it is interconnected with with broader environments and real life itself. One example is like piloting a drone. It is something that was quite unheard of a couple of years ago, or we were seeing it as something futuristic. But as we see in many in such a few years of time, it has actually become, and there is potential of it becoming, a very important element of our daily lives. So piloting a drone, whereas when I was a student was something that I had not really heard of, because there were no drones. There were just these remote, these wonderful flying planes that we used to pilot. But it was a very simple technology in itself, as it was like that. Right now, we see drastic changes, and of course, professions that never existed, and of course, that stem from technology that did not exist before. So this means that there is a necessity for innovative employees as well. And this is why the school setting has to always be alerted when it comes to this. And of course, in the past, what was the situation? Everything was okay if you knew your trade, if you knew what it is that you wanted to do as a future. You would be focusing on those subjects that would immediately give you the opportunity to pursue a career on what it is that you were to follow. And of course, you followed some orders, you knew your trade, and everything went well. However, of course, in the ever changing, evolving world, there is a need for flexibility. So that is simply not enough. It's not enough because this is what we were mentioning when it comes to the 21st century skills. 21st century skills are not only to be uh, in association with what is being taught in a classroom setting and with classroom instruction. It has to derive its content also from real life, and the interests that students have, the stimulation that they get from what are the changes that we're going through, and the means that we are making use of, and the ways through which we communicate, and how the language that we are teaching is really useful for them through devices through which they are gonna need to make use of in order to communicate, in order to demonstrate how the language that they are learning is really useful for them. Because yes, a common characteristic, a common complaint, let's say, that all teachers have to share is that, okay, what is it that happens with my students when I do not uh, force them to make use of the target language, English in our case? What is the situation? What is the case? Well, the truth is that there is not a lot of reinforcement to make practice of the language, due to the fact that they are familiar, that they can communicate in their first language, like L1 in Russian, right? However, when it is broadcasted through a device, or when they are to understand the content of a YouTube video that does not have the subtitles, or there's no translation available, then this creates a requirement for them to be able to understand the content. So this is sometimes, always, it serves also as a reinforcer and a driving force in order to uh, improve their knowledge in the language. So this is why we are to think about as ICT as a great booster in a lot of ways of teaching, and at the same time for the students to learn the language. So as you can see here, this is something which is quite popular. It has taken over the ELT world. I'm pretty sure that the majority of you have come across or have heard of the 21st century competencies. So as you can see here, this is something like the full pack of what the 21st century competencies include. And of course, you can see that it is separated. They are separated into three categories: the foundational literacies, competencies themselves, the core part, let's say, and of course, the character traits, the qualities, what is being cultivated based on the core part, how we season, let's say, the main ingredients that we already have, the raw material that we have from previous centuries, right? And so let's take it one by one and start off, first of all, with the foundational literacies. Now, over to you. As you can see here, we see 6 categories of subjects, right? And where is it that we usually find these subjects? Okay, what do these remind you of? Literacy, numeracy, scientific literacy? It's not really something new. It's something that it's quite, we are all as educators and previously as students have been familiar with, right? So these are more or less can be titled as, apart from the foundational literacies, they are the subjects that students learn at school. Nothing new about this. And this is why I call it the raw material. This is something that we were taught also. Some of us, okay, especially those of you who, I mean, I assume a lot of you who have chosen to teach English as a foreign language, or mainly being focused with literacy, uh, would be probably getting goosebumps with numeracy and scientific literacy. For me, it was definitely the case regarding numbers. It was not, let's say, my area of expertise. So, of course, these, however, were the foundational literacies, which are, of course, the raw material that we need to make use of in order to instruct, teach our students. Now, in order to make it, polish it, and shed some 21st century light upon it, we need those foundational literacies to undergo through a process based on the competencies themselves. So this is the core part, and this is what we need to take a look at in order to, let's say, add this 21st century element in the subjects that we are familiar with and we had been taught as well. A lot of you might say, for example, that we have a much more of and the one main difference is that in the past we had a much more of a, let's say, we were taught and a specific subject, and we did not have that much involvement. It depended, of course, on the teacher always, right? It would depend on the teacher. But in general, I always have in mind that in the past, and it was how I was taught also, uh, much less of involvement on behalf of the students when it comes to education. These competencies have the role of actually putting into practice what the 21st century competencies are all about. The 4 C's, like one of you mentioned in one of the initial slides that I addressed the question, and spot on it is. Yes, those competencies, the critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, communication, and cooperation, these 4 C's. So what I'm gonna do right now is, okay, it's not gonna be a behavioral interview, but it's just an opportunity for some introspection. That's just a bit of reflection on how you personally implement these 21st century competencies by taking a look at them one by one. Now, of course, you can make use of the chat box in order to respond to this. So let me start off with critical thinking. If we were one of the many definitions, if we definitions that that you can find on critical thinking, and if we are to think about critical thinking, one definition can be looking at problems in a new way, innovative way, and making a connection across the different subjects and disciplines. Now, over to you. If we are to think about that, critical thinking is about promoting and reinforcing a new approach to teaching and making students think and think anew. And also, if we are asking learners to generate and ask their own unique essential questions, let's think about our 45-minute lesson. to what extent do you personally allow room for critical thinking in the lesson? Rate yourselves from 1 to 10, and you can submit your answers in the chat box if you want to. Now, of course, when we are thinking about our 45-minute lesson, I always think about a course book where usually a typical lesson includes the reading passage, there is some grammar, or sometimes there is a listening activity. There is, of course, a reading comprehension activity that follows uh, the passage, the reading passage, and usually as an outro to the lesson, we've got a speaking activity. In there, in that 45-minute lesson, in those 2 pages that we've got in the course book, how much time do we allocate for critical thinking? How much time do you, how many, let's say, questions that have the element of critical thinking in them would you say that you would spend? Rate yourselves from 1 to 10. I'm not going to be sharing your names. It is something that is very going to be very confidential, of course, and it is, of course, an opportunity for colleagues to reflect upon what it is that they are, how they are performing in the lesson. One of you says about 5 minutes. I try to give up to dedicate about 5 minutes for critical thinking questions, to address critical thinking questions to my students. 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. Okay. So I assume if you have, let's say, it depends, of course, on time. And of course, it's always depends on the lesson. I'm pretty sure because as a teacher myself, I remember when I had to teach the direct and indirect speech. Of course, this would require a lot more time to dedicate in order to make the indirect speech a bit more understood for the students. So of course, this would mean that I would concentrate on that part, let's say, more. But of course, there are lessons which allow us, which give us the opportunity to be a bit more interactive and, of course, ask those questions. Usually, if you think about your course book, and I know from because okay, it's Publications and the Educational Group that I represent, I know that there are critical thinking questions in the course book. Usually, we find these in post-reading activities or warm-up reading activities, right? So it is something that I always like to think about, and I like to always spotlight it because it is an opportunity for you to transform your lesson and make the lesson a bit more communicative. Everything is important, of course. Teaching grammar is also very important. Of course, going through the reading comprehension activities, which sometimes have some raise some critical thinking questions. However, of course, there are parts of the book, and of course, it is also has to do with how we exploit the material. Critical thinking can sprout even from describing an image by putting in the center an image, or before you begin the lesson, having in mind what is the connection you want to make with your lesson and what intro you want to make with your lesson to your lesson. You can have an image and ask your students to think about what it is that they're going to be discussing or what is being projected in this specific image. So okay, I can see your answer. Some of you sent you about, you would rate yourselves there about 20 to 30%, right? You would give yourself, let's say, more or less a 4, or yeah, more or less of a 4 out of 10. Okay, so let's go to this one, which has to do with the second C, not, of course, in uh, ranking the importance. Of course, it is they're all equally important. Creativity, and creativity, a definition that we can find about creativity is trying new approaches to get things done. To get things done equals innovation, and of course inventing. And usually, what is it that comes to your mind if you think about the course book? How do we allow room for creativity in the class? How is it that we can reinforce, how we can promote inquisitiveness, how can we encourage our students to uh, show their own character, their own interests, and base on their learning experiences what they can project in a classroom setting. How can we allow room for creativity in a lesson? What would you say? I always like to think about it because I consider the course book, whatever course book it is that we are making use of, as the main tool, the most important tool. I always think about how we can actually uh, implement the ideas that we have and allow room for 21st century competencies to take place, because the the course book is always the main tool, but how we exploit the material is what our own personal touch, let's say, is what allows room for creativity to take place. So based on a lesson, for example, what would you say are the more creative lessons that you have in your books that allow room for creativity? Especially the way, the shift that ELT has taken over the last couple of years. I am pretty much familiar with the fact that there are a lot of CLIL pages and a lot of activities that focus, and a lot of pages actually, that are focusing on getting the students to make a project out of the content that they have. So those projects are not, especially nowadays, typical compositions or reports or a typical writing activity that we are asking students to do. If you take a look, especially a lot of the latest editions from publications, you will see that projects are not necessarily a writing activity. It can be a video that the students have to make and present themselves. This is something that uh, is connected with something that they are interested in doing in other environments apart from the school environment. So this is an opportunity to make a link, a connection with influences that they get from other environments. And of course, something that is based on the way that our society is changing. So a project can be creating a 2-minute video in order to project in class, like a YouTuber, or become, exactly, yes, I can see some of you are saying a program, or pair work, group discussions, dialogues that are connected to a topic with the presentations, all are all about creativity, because you might be assigning a specific project, but you might be asking for their own innovative way of presenting that project. So you leave something up to them in order to find a clever way. All you have to do is just deliver that spark in order for them to start to think how they're gonna impress, challenge them, how they're gonna impress their classmates with their own personal touch in their presentation. So yes, a lot of this can stem from there. As you can see, some things, yes, will not change. Yes, they will have to work together. Yes, they will have to write down their ideas. These are the based on the foundational literacies that we have been educated with. However, the means through which uh, everything is going to be put into practice or they're going to be presenting is alternated. So this is the drastic change. So it's not a matter of actually thinking about how am I going to make my lesson futuristic. It's all about how I'm going to just get some touches, make some connections with what are the interests of the students in the current world. And yes, we can see to a great degree that YouTube, that video games, that a lot of the technology, especially in our case as English teachers, has boosted English to a great degree. And it's actually a main reinforcer for them to practice the language. Let's go to the other C, which is cooperation. And I'm pretty sure that some of you who responded, I was looking at the chat box, have more or less covered this with creativity, because yeah, usually this is what we need to do in a classroom setting. If you're a teacher, and especially right now with the pandemic, where you were teaching remotely, but I'm pretty sure it goes for the students themselves as well. This is something that they have been deprived of: cooperation. And yes, breakout rooms and everything that the platforms can allow us to do gave, let's say, a sort of notion of cooperation, but it was not really the real thing, right? Because this is how we take advantage of the dynamics that a classroom setting can offer, by allowing room for cooperation and giving the students the opportunity to um, work in groups. Yes, individual type activities are good, but when you are in a classroom setting, I always consider that it is the best way is to take advantage of this setting is to group your students or pair your students in order to reinforce practice and monitor how they are working on these activities. And of course, last but not least important, it's communication, sorry, and the sharing of thoughts, questions, ideas, and solutions. This is one of the core parts of what is it that we are experiencing right now. It's, let's say, one of the top soft skills that definitely has to be cultivated in a classroom setting in order not only to get the students to speak the target language, but to learn how to cooperate and learn how to work together. And this can be done only by learning how to communicate and be listening to each other and sharing ideas and be listening to what their classmate has to recommend. And of course, work on a for a common goal. This can be done only by communicating their messages. So we got to think about, and if it is something that we should definitely facilitate in a classroom, it's it's communication. And of course, get our learners to develop their own personal learning links in order to communicate. This can be done, yes, if we are to think about the speaking activities, and as they included, and most of them are require pair work or group contribution from all pairs of the group, then this is one way of actually putting that into practice. How we can deliver it also and can exploit it, it is something that must stem also from what are the reasons for being able to communicate. Let's say if you want to pass a message to somebody, you gotta make sure that it is going to be well understood. So you want to introduce it to your classmates, and the challenging part should be not only just blathering about something, but also being able to give your listeners supply your listeners with the pieces of information that are going to help them understand. So these is, let's say, these are the competencies that season the foundational literacies and polish them to get them through this 21st century era and not have, let's say, the typical characteristics that the 20th century foundational literacies were all about. And of course, these we will not have time to go through the questionnaire and the video, unfortunately, because my colleague Gregg is going to be right up, and I don't want to take any of his valuable time. So it's just that there was a questionnaire more or less recapitulating what it is that we were talking about uh, in regarding the implementation of the 21st century competencies and the 4Cs. So let's go to the third part, the third category, which is what is it that these competencies cultivate? And it has to do with the character qualities. When in a school setting you employ critical thinking, you get your students to cooperate, you get your students to communicate, then of course this leads to these important character traits, character qualities, which is what their employers are seeking for, even in the current world, but of course in the ever-changing future, constantly changing future that we are going and we are going to be uh, always going through. So the main idea behind the character qualities is to be able to get the students to understand that it's not only a matter of excelling, becoming a good teacher, because I mean, I remember, all of us probably can remember that we had probably a lot of teachers in our lives, right? However, and I'm pretty sure that all of them, in order to become teachers, were very good with their subjects and their traits. However, we were able, even from a very young age, to distinguish which were the teachers to that could fascinate us, that could carry on by demonstrating their knowledge, and of course at the same time making it very familiar to us, and becoming, and us as students becoming very close to them, and being able to understand, be willing to understand what is it that they're trying to instruct us. So it has to do also, it all boils down to the character qualities and how these teachers, for example, were able to pass on the message and um, let's say motivate students to participate. All these are characteristics, the character qualities that lead to autonomous learning. And this is why we consider autonomous learning very important, because yes, it is important to know your trade, but how you adapt, how flexible you are, is something that is a matter of training as a character and being able to cooperate in different environments with people coming from different backgrounds, different environments, and being able to coordinate or cooperate with them. And this is, I wanted to show you this as an example. This could be a text from a reading comprehension activity. This is just a sample in order to see how all of these 21st century competencies that we were talking about can be put into practice in a typical reading course book. Usually, yes, we did make a reference of the importance of projects, of CLIL, of all these special, let's say, uh, additions that are included in modern course books with a modern approach. This, however, does not mean that we need to wait for a specific page that is titled as project in order to let's say, implement some project elements in this specific activity. We can do it in a typical reading comprehension activity. And this could be, as you can tell, it is an article that has been taken from a newspaper, right? And could be, let's say, part of a C1, B2 level, C1 level text, right? So how can we implement those 4Cs here? First of all, there is a title here, and if I am to make use of the interactive whiteboard, for example, I can isolate the content from here and just have the students focus on the title. So Cindy hits Tidestone. Go figure. Who is Cindy and why was she so mean to Tidestone, right? So we can actually come to familiarize students, yet Cindy is probably not a lady, a very cruel, mean lady that has hit somebody, by getting them to focus on the image. And let us assume that none of the ladies here seem so cruel to be a Cindy that hits Tidestone. So before we get them to concentrate on the text, we can actually familiarize them with a lot of the, let's say, natural disasters that have been given a name. And of course, Cindy is not necessarily a cruel woman or a cruel girl. It can be a natural disaster that has been named after Cindy. And Tidestone is not somebody who has been left in the hands of. Yeah, sorry. Yes, I can't hear you. You're muted, Dimitri. You're muted. Okay. If there is something, I'm time's almost up, so I'm just gonna go quickly through this. If there is a question, you can feel free to ask me right now. Another way, I just want to say this, that how we can transform a reading comprehension activity into a much more of a communicative activity. You can have students treat it as a press conference. So two of the students can be, let's say, the people who were hit by Tidestone, they were by Cindy, and they were locals in Tidestone, and they happened to be in the middle of this hurricane. And so the rest of the students will have the role of the reporter, and in a press conference have to ask the questions. And these are ways of cultivating these character qualities. Social and cultural awareness is something also which is demonstrated in a lot of the culture pages. And one way of doing it and making students familiar with different cultures around the world is by showing some of these gestures here, which probably have a different meaning throughout cultures. You can get a lot of these samples from our Full Blast book. And I don't know if you have any questions before I leave room for everybody else. That's yes. That's a good one, Greg. My colleague Greg just responded to this also. They should name it after a man. Why should it always be a woman? Right on, Greg. That's true. That's so true. So I don't know if you have any questions that you would like to ask before I leave you into the safe hands of my colleague Greg, who is always great with his presentations, and I'm always very happy to be with him in common settings. So anything that you would like to ask, it was my pleasure. I know it was a very brief session, so hopefully we'll have the opportunity to be able to come into contact physically, that is, and get to have your contribution much more livelier, and of course on the spot, ask the question when it is that you want to ask it without having in the middle any sort of platform.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you,
It gave me
Galina.
really a brief but very informative and nice presentation. And yeah, 21st century competencies and skills, they have already become an integral part of any studies, any learning process. So that's why it's always important to be conscious about, well, the things that we are doing, implementing in our lessons. So that's why thank you very much for this very interesting and informative session. So
Thank you very much. Thank you
Yeah.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So let me introduce our second speaker, Gregg Sotiropoulos. So Gregg, yeah, I hope that I also pronounced your surname properly. Yeah, so yeah, okay, thank you for switching your camera on. Well, so Gregg actually began his career in education back in 1996. Yeah, so pretty long ago, as an elementary school teacher in New York. And Gregg continues to this day to motivate, inspire, and coach both teachers and students. And he does it worldwide, so which is very impressive. In today's ever-changing society, his approach to education is led by the guiding principle of doing good. So he holds a bachelor's degree with a double major in education and art, and an MBA with a focus on managerial interactions. So Gregg has participated in numerous conferences, delivering plenaries, workshops, and seminars. and he's currently working for Publications as an ELT academic consultant and teacher trainer. So Gregg, today we'll talk about content and language integrated learning, or CLIL. So Gregg, over to you.
Thank you so very, very much. Thank you very much for that amazing introduction. Chris, always a pleasure. And as Chris mentioned in his webinar, through the 21st Century Skills, it also touches upon CLIL lessons and how to attract and connect with students through these particular lessons. So I want to thank you all for joining us, first and foremost. And this will be very interactive. So please get ready, stretch out your fingers. Everyone come onto the chat box. My first question is, could you please write the answer to 5 plus 5? What's the answer to 5 plus 5? I know you're a little bit tired, but I need to ask you this question because I need to wake you up a little bit. So please, everyone comment to the chat box and answer the question 5 plus 5. Wonderful. I see that we have everyone on spot right now. I see the number 10. I'm going to ask you another question now. Can you please tell me the answer to, what is the answer to what do you think? What is the answer to now? This is very interesting. Some of you are writing 7. Somebody wrote various. Somebody wrote 8. 7. So a lot of you are writing the number 7. So this is your interpretation based on the first guide that I gave you, the first introductory question on what is 5 plus 5? 10. What is, I never said the word plus, but I showed you my hand as 5 and my other hand as 2. So someone, Larissa just said, it may be 3. So what I'm sharing with you right now is that when we deal with CLIL pages in a course book, we focus on higher order thinking skills. Okay, critical thinking, creativity, looking beyond what is obvious. And that's what I wanted to share with you right now with this experiment, so to speak. Now, let's continue with the chat box, shall we? Because as we're dealing with CLIL, content integrating different subjects to learn about, let's answer these questions. Number 1, adults have how many teeth? A or B? What do you think, guys? Answer the question in the chat box very quickly. You have 5 seconds to answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, very good. Let's go to question number 2 now. Let's all focus on to question number 2. To find the area of a square, you do what to the lengths of side A and B? Do you add or do you multiply? Do you add or do you multiply? What do you do? Now, my dear friends, look at how I am role modeling when I am speaking by showing my hand gestures as someone just wrote. All right, excellent. Number 3, amphibians do what with eggs? Do they lay eggs or they don't lay eggs? What do you think? Do amphibians lay eggs or they don't lay eggs? All right. Number 4, who invented calendars and baths? The Romans or the Maya? Who do you think? Mayans or Romans? Who invented calendars and baths? And finally, the Richter scale Mr. Richter, is used to measure the magnitude of an earthquake or the effect of an earthquake? What do you think? A or B? All right. So this little quiz that I offered you right now covered many different subject areas, didn't it? I took you back to a lot of knowledge that you learned in primary, middle school, and high school, probably. Some of us are sitting there going, oh my goodness, I can't remember. I got a little bit confused right now, but that's okay. Because the answer to number 1 was in fact 32, A. The answer to number 2 was to multiply the lengths. The answer to number 3, amphibians do lay eggs. To number 4, what do you think? Romans, Mayans, Romans, Mayans, Romans, that's right, very good. And finally, does it show the effect of an earthquake or the magnitude of an earthquake? The magnitude. Okay, so CLIL learning. Does it really matter so much on the English language that we are using? Or is it rather how we communicate, how we connect with our students in learning something new in different subject areas? So this is what we're going to cover today. Number 1, what is CLIL? What is it exactly? Number 2, why is it important in our curriculum, in our syllabus, in our day-to-day lessons? What are the aims of CLIL? What is it that we are looking for? The objectives with our students? What challenges do we as teachers face when dealing with these lessons? And finally, how can we plan our lessons and support our learners through these CLIL lessons that we're going to be talking about today? So this is just an overview of what we're going to cover. Okay, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please, by all means, do so in the chat box. I have it open all the time. Okay, so CLIL, as you saw from the title of the presentation, it is an acronym: Content Language Integrated Learning. Taking a step back from the macro skills and the micro skills of English and injecting a lesson that focuses more on a subject area. So the subject areas that we can cover are many: physics, biology, science, maths, computers, technology, language, history, economics, arts, and music. In looking at all of these subject areas, what surrounds them in communicating about them are the macro skills of English, okay, the competencies of reading, listening, speaking, and writing. Now, as Marsh, one of the key, I would say, not so much founders, but more so at the forefront of what CLIL does for our students, says that it refers to situations where subjects, or at least part of a subject, are taught through a language, a foreign language, okay? But there are 2 different aims when dealing with CLIL pages. First is the content that the students need to learn, and at the same time, learning new, let's say, skill sets through the foreign language, in this case, English. So we not only have the macro skills, but we have also the micro skills. We'll be using certain grammar structures, and more importantly, and this is the focus, direct, specific, customized vocabulary based on the subject that we're teaching our students. Okay. Coyle, another founding father of CLIL, says that it is dynamic. And I wholeheartedly believe this, and I will show this to you in this webinar, that it is a very dynamic, let's say, resource to use with your students. Okay. The topic that you're teaching can be very flexible. Okay. Integrated in some kind of mutual beneficial way to provide, number one, value, okay, to that moment of learning. Okay. And the educational outcome, what the students produce to us to show us that they actually understand, has such a range of possibilities that I'm going to show you today. Okay. Just give me a moment to move the chat box again. Oh. So to let's say come full circle on what CLIL is. CLIL is like an umbrella, and it covers so many different aspects of ELT learning and teaching. It also covers, though, bilingual education, touching upon multilingual education, okay, content-based instruction, English as an additional language, as happens in math and science courses, immersion into the subject, okay. There's really no way out. And language across the curriculum, because it will be done all in English, okay. So why is it important? Teachers, why do you think CLIL is an important component in our syllabus, in our curriculum? Why would you think? What does it do? How can it help? What are the benefits of putting CLIL into our syllabus? As Chris mentioned in his webinar, and I like to tie it in, that yes, it focuses on 21st century competencies, without a doubt. Okay, on all spectrums, it covers this. But there are also some other competencies that we're going to look at in a few minutes. So it's important that we as teachers allow our students to use the language that they are learning every day with you through another channel, okay? Not focusing so much on the language itself. This in turn activates what we call active learning. All right. CLIL lessons are, as Coyle said, dynamic, exciting. There needs to be a lot of preparation. Yes, truth be told, there needs to be some extra added preparation for these particular lessons. But the result, the outcome, is worth it. All right. The art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery, and that's what we're going to do. This is why it's so important, because through CLIL, we allow the students to discover new knowledge through the use of English that they have been building on day after day, week after week, month after month. So, to show you very briefly in a video, okay, I don't like to just talk about it myself as a teacher, as a consultant. I want students to show you why it's so important, okay? So what's the key word? What's the key word that students are telling us? What is that one word that we need to focus on in general, but more so when we're talking about CLIL lessons? Yes, Tatiana. To engage your students, to take that extra step and to engage them. But is it easy? Is it easy to engage our students? No, right? It's difficult. It's challenging. I understand that. I feel you. I mean, I've, you know, as we mentioned before, 26 years in education. I've been a teacher at the very beginning of my career for many, many years in New York. And it is extremely hard. Yes, as you said, it is extremely hard. So when we're given a lesson that is totally out of the realm of the English, let's say, structure that we're used to, we have to change focus and engage our students differently. So some of the challenges that we face is the knowledge of the subject. We as teachers, do we know maths very well to be able to teach it in English? I'm sure you know maths very well. You showed me at the very beginning with 5 + 5, right? And so the knowledge of the subject, the language level, because each subject has a very unique, distinct language, which maybe just as students have difficulty, we as teachers may have difficulty. Okay. Somebody writes, CLIL helps to integrate the subjects and makes learning holistic. I agree with you 110%. It does. The structure of a lesson, okay, regarding CLIL, is it the same structure as a regular English lesson? Absolutely not. And finally, for certain subjects, don't we need materials in order to connect with our students and to make that impact, to engage them? Here you go. We need materials, don't we? So all of these together causes maybe anxiety, a little bit of concern regarding these lessons that we have to teach, which I'm going to be showing you examples of so that I can show you some tips and tricks on how to conduct them. So sometimes we, as a visual prompt, we look like this, as if to say, where do I begin? How am I able to connect the puzzle, connect the dots? Well, let's take it step by step. Okay, let's label the challenges. Now, as Chris mentioned about 21st century skills, we have the 4 C's, the 21st century skills. Here, though, there's only one of the 4 C's of CLIL that is the same as the 4 C's of 21st century. The first C, what do you think it could be, guys? Dear teachers, subject knowledge. What could be the first C? What do you think? Put on your thinking caps. Write down in the chat box. What could be the first C? Content knowledge. Oh, subject knowledge. What could be the first C? What could be the word for the first C? First C, subject knowledge. Now, I want to see how many people are paying attention to when I speak, because I do this as a test. As a teacher, I sometimes give the answer while the students are listening. I just did it. And I went, oh, and I put my hand to my mouth, but I kept speaking. So, there you go. Now you're connecting the dots. So, content, very good. Content is the first C. The second C, thinking skills. Thinking, somebody wrote it already. I'll give some other people a moment to think about it. Thinking skills, when you have to think about something, you have to show your what? Your, it rhymes with competition. It rhymes with competition, sounds like competition. Here we go. Helping you out a little bit, like the teacher with the students. Competence. Competence. Okay. Cognition. All right. Very good. Doesn't sound the same, but that's okay. Comprehension. Love it. You see now, we're generating discussion. We're generating ideas as we should in the classroom. Okay. Or in a virtual discussion. The third, language interaction. Language interaction, this is an easy one. It's the same as the 21st century skill, one of the 4 C's. 2, yes, very good, communicate. And finally, be aware of other societies, respect others. It begins with C. What would this be? To be aware of other societies. Oh, I like that. Compassion. Very good. Compassion, though, yes. Excellent. Culture. All right. Content, cognition. Very good, guys. Cognition. Very good. Competence. Very good. Comprehension. Excellent. Communication and culture. Did you notice that I never said that you were wrong? Right? As a teacher, we never say that, nope, that's wrong. It's cognition. It's not comprehension. It's not competence. Okay. It's not compassion. It's culture. But through culture, understanding culture, you need compassion, right? Okay. So let's look at content. Teaching objectives. Clear teaching objectives are given to you in our CLIL pages throughout our course book. And so course books. And so with these clear teaching objectives, at the end, we should have learning outcomes that correlate with the objectives of the CLIL lesson. Okay. Cognition. Now, thinking skills. Here I'm going to spend a moment because I want to focus on a specific skill set for cognition. Do you remember Bloom, Mr. Bloom, Bloom's taxonomy? Yes. And so we take Bloom's taxonomy and it's somewhat revised. And what happens here is we have 2 types of skills. We have LOTS, L-O-T-S, and HOTS, H-O-T-S. We have lower order thinking skills that are on the bottom of this pyramid. And then we have what you have been using this entire time with me are higher order thinking skills. From the very moment I began to speak, asking you about 5 + 5 and then showing you 5 fingers and 2 fingers. We don't want our students to just remember. We don't want our students to just understand. We need to work together, cooperatively, okay, to collaborate and to push and engage them to use applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Now, this is all fine with me explaining this, but I need to show you what I'm talking about. Okay. In this science lesson, in this CLIL lesson, the content, the subject is science. Now, I'm not a very good science teacher. I don't know a lot about science. But in my preparation for this particular lesson, I see that there are vocabulary words and a listening/reading activity. Let's look at number 2 for a moment. Listen and answer. how many animal groups are there? Can you name them? Right away, the answer is there. There are 6 animal groups. So why even ask our students to open their books to page 91 of this amazing, colorful, intriguing, engaging lesson? Keep your books closed. Ask your students the question, how many animal groups are there? Does anybody know the answer to that question? And have the students start to think about, talk about in groups, some of these animal groups. They will start finding some of the answers. Then ask them to open up to page 91. You can go through the vocabulary if you wish, or you can just focus a little bit on number 2, the activity. Following suit on the warm-up question, and then jumping into vocabulary. Food for thought. Okay, I like to look at education as trial and error. Take a risk. Okay, a calculated risk. Sometimes go with the flow of what your students want, rather than what the teacher book tells you to do. Now, Bloom's taxonomy. Remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. And I have an example next to each. Okay, you see that here. Compare and contrast 2 animals, animal groups. Remembering. Can you list 3 animal groups? Understand. Find information, apply. Is this correct? Now, I'm putting you on the spot. Have I connected the right questions to the right part of Bloom's taxonomy? I'll give you a moment. It's okay. There's no rush. I really want you to think about this. Evaluating which animal groups can lay eggs. Evaluating. So somebody spot on read it and said, no, but this is not right. Not quite. But you can always correct your answer, right? Yes, you can. So when we look at Bloom's taxonomy, we want to make sure that our questions are appropriate for the specific, let's say, level of Bloom's taxonomy, the thinking skills. So this is the right way to start the lesson. Let's remember, can you list 3 animal groups? Quite easy after the students have done this. Understanding which animal groups can lay eggs. Applying, decide in which group animals belong to based on characteristics. And here we get to the higher order. Analyze, compare, contrast 2 of the 6 animal groups. Do this in pairs. Evaluate. Listen to someone talking about an animal group. Whether the information is correct based on what you know. Create, find information about an animal from a specific group and create a presentation. Do you see how this takes from rote learning, from the simplistic way of learning, and we take our students, our future global agents of change, and challenge them at a level that they expect us to in a fun and engaging manner through CLIL. In communication, we have 2 very distinct sections of communication when it comes to CLIL. The first is BICS and the second is CAL. Now, when we're on the ocean and we see an iceberg, what we see is BICS, and that is the basic interpersonal communication skill set of our students. It is being able to talk about what is on the surface, what they can see, what they can understand, and what they can remember. Okay. And so when we look at Bloom's taxonomy and we get to higher order, that's where we look underneath the water. That's when we start to say, okay, there is cognitive academic language proficiency. Okay, CLIL. And this is where we want our students to dive literally into and explore just how vast this information, okay, can be found. So focusing on CLIL again, he talks about the language triptych, all right? And that is when we communicate what we're learning, we communicate the language of learning, and that is the vocabulary and the concepts. Then we communicate the language for learning, and that is taking it one step further and basically looking at why is this important? Okay, so we can look at language of learning as what it is. The language for learning is why is it so important? And then language through learning is the how. Okay, how is it important? Okay. So let us please just remember that CLIL is not translating content learning from the mother language, L1, into another language. It is using the English language as a vehicle, as a tool for content learning. Coyle said, using the language to learn is as important as learning to use the language. And I believe this wholeheartedly. And finally, looking at culture. Intercultural awareness, very, very important, especially with everything that is going on. Our future global agents of change, global citizenship, to have our students be accountable and have that respect, not only for others, but first and foremost, who should they respect, ladies and gentlemen, my dear fellow educationalists? Who should our students respect first, before others? Who should they respect first? Give me the answer in the chat box. Come on. I'll give you 5 more seconds. 4, 3. I don't see that chat box on fire. I want to see it on fire. Light it on fire. Come on. Who should students respect first, before others? Tatiana, you nailed it right on the head at the very, very beginning. Very good, Catherine. Come on, guys, think about it, because they don't. This is the issue. They don't. Very good. Themselves, 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 themselves. That's it. Themselves first. Even, believe it or not, someone wrote teachers. Before they respect us, they need to respect themselves. That's how they can understand how important it is. Okay. First, by looking at themselves, being self-aware. So here's a little project that I offer you all, you teachers, to give your students. This is a symbol for recycling. Okay. And because I usually do this when I'm live with teachers, I offer you this, this chance to do this with your students. And so we are covering three different subject areas: science, art, and social studies. And what I want you to do is to ask your students, why is it so important to recycle nowadays? Because it has changed. Recycling has changed. Reduce, reuse, recycle. To use different words, to create a different visual prompt, to create a different logo, and to have groups of students use their higher order thinking skills in Bloom's revised taxonomy, and to collaborate and communicate on this particular idea. Okay. You should always start with your own culture. It makes it easier to relate to other cultures and people. Yes, and that's why it is so important to talk about culture. Okay, but to have our students realize that they need to know as much as they can about themselves and their own heritage and culture in order to understand others more effectively. So this is a little project that I offer you for your students. Okay. And finally, the features now, and I'm going to show you in examples of a CLIL lesson. It's, you know, students are very comfortable in where they are in school. What students can do on their own? What students cannot do on their own? What we need to do is have our students in the zone of proximal development, and that's called scaffolding. That's pushing them just enough so that they start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit outside of their comfort zone. Oh my goodness, what are you doing to me? I don't understand. I need some extra help. Okay, you're helping me, but I can't do it. They say that so fast, so easily. I can't. Stop. There is no I can't. You can. You just don't want to. You're too comfortable back there. So let's all work together in helping them reach those objectives. Okay. All right. You're welcome. So in scaffolding, the first thing we do, build on their background knowledge, schema theory, realia. Through what? How we're going to build on it? Through visual, multisensory support, graphic organizers, taking them from lots to hots, and giving them amazing projects through these CLIL pages. Okay, Greg, that's enough. Show us what you got. Let's show us some examples. All right, let's go. History, geography. These are the two contents. History, geography. Okay. Asking students if they know any famous explorers, if they know what they discovered. Initiating a short discussion, encouraging higher performing students to answer it in English. Having those students be the role models for the other students. Initiating a short class discussion and encouraging all students to participate. Now, here we have Marco Polo. You guys have students find about explorers in your town, your city, your country, etc. Make it a little bit more customized. Compare and contrast. You said about culture. Yes. To relate, start with their own. Yes. Here you go. Have them start to find out about their own explorers from their own background. All right. Visual prompts. Does it get any more visual than this? I don't think so. Okay. Having students really explore what the vocabulary is saying by using a flipped classroom approach. Give them the words without visual prompts. Have them go home, have them find visual prompts, have them draw up visual prompts, cut them out, print them out, you name it. Show some of them on technology. When they come back to class, then you have them show what they found. Okay. Here's another one. Science. Understanding the procedure through visual prompts. So, how the world revolves around the sun, Earth, and the seasons that we have. This is an amazing lesson. This lesson, if you take the time out and you have styrofoam balls or even balls made out of paper and skewers, sticks, styrofoam, think outside the box and create something like this. Okay. And have your students always work in pairs or in groups. Okay, with these CLIL lessons. Graphic organizers, right? So I'm showing you a little bit of each section of the scaffolding approach. So amazing dinosaurs, OMG. Kids go crazy about dinosaurs. There are so many things that you can connect to with dinosaurs. I mean, Jurassic Park, hello? Everyone and anyone has seen it. If not, that's your homework for the weekend. And so here we use graphic organizers such as a Venn diagram. Love it. You're teaching students so many things through the use of CLIL, and the students are reinforcing their knowledge of English. Okay. So here we have the Triceratops and the Tyrannosaurus Rex. How are they different? How are they the same? This is how we introduce students to various methods of organizing information. Now, how else can we help our students? What else can we show our students? Charts, rankings, right? Food facts from around the world. Now, is your country in this? Maybe, maybe not. If it isn't, we got to put them in there. But how can we do this? Well, let's ask some questions. Do all people like the same kinds of food? What do you think? Do all people like the same kinds of food? Come on now. I don't think so. Why do people in some countries eat a lot of rice? Where do they eat a lot of rice? Where do people eat the most ice cream? Ooh, interesting question. What do people in Italy eat a lot of? So, intriguing questions, interesting facts. Involve your students in expanding this chart. Okay. Now, I had shown you this lesson to the left, and I'm showing you a lesson to the right. I asked you a question at the very beginning about calendars and baths. I did, didn't I? Okay, good. And you answered them, I think most of you, if not all of you, answered it correctly. Well, here it is. Okay, ancient civilizations. Now, the information is here in the lesson for both the seasons and ancient civilizations. But what else can we do to take our students and to really explore this? We give them project work. blended learning. Let's get them involved in using the internet to find more information about the seasons in your country. Select the information you think is interesting and use it to make a poster. Okay. Now, does the poster have to be two-dimensional, flat, or can the students make it three-dimensional, 3D, whatever they wish? Okay. Ancient civilization. Use the internet to find information about other ancient civilizations. Select the information you think is interesting and use it to make a poster. Why not? Have the students create their own civilization using a shoebox, using materials. Ah, Gregg, materials. Yes. Okay. Having the materials that you need so they can make the projects that you ask them to do, either at home or in school. Don't assume they have everything at home. Don't assume that they have internet. Some students don't have internet. Some students have poor internet. So know your students. Okay. So CLIL lessons, what do? The students are presented with the first C, the content, by us. They assimilate all the concepts. Okay, that are presented. They use language, the English language, to learn and learn to use the language in producing what is asked of them. The tasks, the activities, help the students to practice the language and then apply the knowledge that they have acquired by showing you, the teacher. The acronym for CLIL, I believe I should change it. Create lively, interesting lessons. That's CLIL. Okay. Content integrated learning. Create lively, interesting lessons. Okay. So, my dear friends, my fellow educationalists, if you have any questions, by all means, I don't know if you have time. By all means, you can send it to me in the chat box if you wish. I wanted to leave a little time in case you had some questions. Thank you. I tried.
Yeah, there are a lot of thank yous. Yeah, and really, that's been very engaging and very, very informative. Thank you, Gregg, for mentioning so many great facts and big names, and it was real music for my methodological and teaching ears. So thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
Really, really informative and great. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we can see a lot of nice comments. Yeah. So some participants were taking notes. Yeah. So really, really, Gregg, thank you. You've given us a lot of food for thought, really,
It's
and
a
ideas
pleasure.
for further
I look forward to
research.
seeing everybody in person at some point.
Oh yeah, we hope so too. Okay, thank you. So then it's time for our next presentation, and let me introduce my colleague, Elena Ivanova. Elena is our representative in St. Petersburg. Well, first, a few words about Elena, and now it will be one more interesting switch, you know, from English to Russian. So Елена окончила РГПУ имени Герцена в 2001 году по специальности учитель английского и немецкого языка. И опыт преподавания у Елены с 2001 года. Огромный, фантастический опыт преподавания И в настоящее время Елена является региональным представителем компании ONARA в Санкт-Петербурге и северо-западном регионе. И Елена сегодня расскажет нам о том, как можно эффективно использовать readers или книги для чтения на занятиях. Елена, прошу вас.
Спасибо. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Сейчас, коллеги, я поделюсь своим экраном. Спасибо, Галина, за представление. Я рада приветствовать вас на онлайн-конференции Books for School. И тема моего выступления сегодня будет «Читаем вместе с National Geographic Learning». Мы сегодня поговорим с вами о целях внеклассного чтения. Также рассмотрим серии книг для чтения издательства National Geographic Learning. И я позволю дать себе методические рекомендации, как сделать внеклассное чтение наиболее эффективным для наших студентов и таким образом для нас тоже. Итак, начинаем с целей внеклассного чтения. Why reading? Почему нам важно, чтобы наши студенты, помимо обязательных уроков по чтению в классе, читали что-то дополнительно на иностранном языке? Ну, конечно, сам ответ просится сам. Прежде всего, это совершенствование языковых навыков, как лексических, так и грамматических. И кроме того, мы формируем различные умения чтения, такие как понять идею текста. Да? Если мы говорим о художественной литературе, проследить развитие сюжета, понять характеристики персонажей и их мотивации их поступков. Если мы говорим о нехудожественной литературе, то это понимание содержания, основного содержания текста, а также его деталей. Кроме того, внеклассное чтение – это хороший способ дать задание на лето, во время каникул, для того, чтобы наши студенты не потеряли те знания, которые они получили в течение академического года, и нам не пришлось начинать занятия в сентябре с вопроса «What language are we learning?». Потому что мы понимаем, если есть некая пауза в занятиях, которая не заполнена дополнительно, то, к сожалению, мы не сможем оставаться на том уровне знаний, на которых мы оставили наших студентов. Таким образом, нам не придется реанимировать знания наших студентов в течение, скажем, сентября месяца, да? И читая летом, почему я говорю летом, потому что это наиболее, в общем, длительный каникулярный период, студенты будут находиться в так называемом языковом окружении. Кроме того, современные книги для чтения включают в себя экзаменационные задания. Естественно, это задания международных экзаменов, формат международных экзаменов, но мы знаем с вами, что, готовясь к международным экзаменам, мы автоматически становимся готовыми к государственной итоговой аттестации, потому что репертуар заданий одинаков. То есть, например, как мы можем проверить чтение, да, это будет multiple choice, multiple matching, ну и, пожалуй, все. Кроме того, чтение, оно, внеклассное чтение, естественно, оно дисциплинирует студентов, и чуть попозже я скажу, каким образом это сделать наиболее эффективно. И мы сегодня очень много говорили о навыках 21 века, так называемых soft skills. Безусловно, один из пунктов навыков 21 века – это эмоциональный интеллект. И чтение художественной и нехудожественной литературы, безусловно, развивает эмоциональный интеллект, что может помочь нашим студентам в их будущей взрослой жизни. Какие книги нам хотелось бы, чтобы читали наши студенты? Конечно, нам бы хотелось, чтобы наши студенты читали хорошие книги. Что такое хорошая книга? На мой взгляд, это та книга, которую мы закончим читать. То есть мы закроем последнюю страницу. И поэтому при выборе книг для чтения необходимо, чтобы они имели оптимальный объем для студентов. Чтобы они, я имею в виду студенты, тоже имели возможность дочитать их до конца. Безусловно, книги должны соответствовать уровню языковой подготовки студента. Конечно, читая книгу, студенты будут сталкиваться с незнакомыми грамматическими конструкциями, с незнакомой лексикой, но книга должна быть им по силам. Потому что в какой-то момент, если книга слишком сложная, слишком трудная и тяжелая, студенты могут потерять к ней интерес, и, собственно, на этом все закончится. Следующий пункт, но он наиболее, конечно, важен для нас, для преподавателей, это наличие заданий к тексту, да? Заданий к книге. Конечно, мы можем сами придумать эти задания, но гораздо удобнее, когда они уже включены в саму книгу. Иллюстрации, фотографии всегда делают любую книгу яркой, интересной, причем как для взрослого читателя, так и для школьников. Безусловно, она должна быть интересной. Соответствовать сфере интересов читателя – это тоже очень важно. Коллеги, я думаю, вы, конечно, знаете, что у нас есть два вида чтения для студентов. Это extensive reading and intensive reading. Extensive reading, когда, в общем, студенты читают в больших объемах, не обращая внимания на какие-то там грамматические конструкции, которые им не знакомы, на незнакомые слова. И таким образом развивается reading fluency. Для нас, как для преподавателей, наиболее интересен вид intensive reading. Почему? Потому что, конечно, он более продуктивный, и они студенты развивают те навыки, которые могут им пригодиться, в том числе и при сдаче экзамена. И как раз к такому виду относятся книги для чтения издательства National Geographic Learning. И сейчас мы с вами поговорим о сериях книг National Geographic Learning. Первая серия, о которой я бы хотела сегодня поговорить, Classic Graphic Novel Collection. Эта серия адресована для студентов средней и старшей школы от уровня B1+ до уровня B2. В этой серии представлены классические произведения, естественно, адаптированные. Кроме того, предполагается использование аудио-CD, и есть для преподавателя онлайн-ресурс Teacher Companion Site с дополнительными материалами. В чем необычность этой серии? В том, что здесь есть книга для учителя, которая называется Teacher's Manual, что, в общем, не часто встретишь среди readers, и даже есть рабочая тетрадь для студентов. Следующая серия называется Footprint Reading Library. Я бы сказала, в общем, это бестселлер издательства National Geographic Learning. Покрывает среднюю и старшую школу. всего представлено на 8 уровнях, начиная с уровня A2 и заканчивая уровнем C1. А отличительная особенность этой серии, что здесь представлена литература не художественная, то есть non-fiction. Так сказать, вшитые экзаменационные задания находятся в самой книге. Также есть книга для учителя и онлайн-ресурсы, такие как Teacher Companion сайт, где есть аудио и видеоматериалы. Поскольку это не художественная литература, видео очень интересные относительно животного мира, относительно географии и так далее. Есть assessment CD-ROM с экзаменационными заданиями, которые вы можете сами адаптировать под студентов. И также, как я сказала, представлена книга для учителя. И третья серия книг для чтения издательства National Geographic Learning, Page Turners, для средней и старшей школы. Всего представлено 12 уровней, начиная с уровня Pre-A1 до C1. Это художественная литература с дополнительными заданиями на понимание содержания. И также в самой книге включена информация по теме книги, да? С исторической точки зрения, с географической точки зрения. Также представлен носитель аудиофайла в формате MP3, и который доступен онлайн. И в заключение я бы хотела поговорить о методических рекомендациях, которые можно использовать, если наши студенты читают во время академического года или на каникулах. Очень важно, чтобы наши студенты хотели читать, чтобы они любили книги. Для этого необходимо обучить их стратегиям чтения, о которых я говорила в самом начале своего выступления, как то понимание текста, понимание основной идеи текста, понимание действий персонажей и, в общем, если говорить о non-fiction, понимание содержания текста, да. Это, безусловно, им поможет, в том числе и на экзамене. Следующий важный момент. Мы должны, в общем, понимать, что даже если наши студенты младшего школьного возраста или среднего школьного возраста или старшего школьного возраста, это, безусловно, самостоятельные личности, которые могут не любить книги. Но книги не как, в общем, нечто, в общем, обобщенное, да, я не люблю книги вообще. Какие-то определенные книги они, безусловно, могут не любить. Вот я, например, не люблю фантастику. Мне неинтересно не читать, кстати, не смотреть ее. Но я с удовольствием читаю биографии, с удовольствием читаю исторические книги. Не очень, кстати, тоже люблю романы. Поэтому, если есть возможность дать нашим студентам выбрать книгу, хотя бы из двух, и это будет очень важно для самого студента, потому что это будет та книга, которую он выбрал. И также, если есть возможность, можно читать вместе с учениками во время академического года. Можно выделить, например, 1 урок в месяц, так сказать, отдохнуть от основной программы и посвятить этот урок книгам для чтения, потому что можно поставить какой-то мини-спектакль, можно поделиться различными проектами. В общем, читать вместе с детьми и, например, посвятить этому какое-то отдельное время тоже, на мой взгляд, очень эффективно. Относительно внеклассного чтения и чтения на каникулах. Безусловно, важно устанавливать сроки. Это к вопросу о дисциплине. Мы можем завести онлайн-доски, например, Padlet и Trello, и подключить туда наших студентов. где они смогут выкладывать свои какие-то рисунки, какие-то видео по теме. Сейчас дети обожают снимать видео любого возраста, и поэтому, в общем, это задание будет для них интересно. Можно устроить фотоконкурс. Если, например, мы работаем со студентами старших классов, можно попросить написать их сочинение, да, на какую-нибудь тему, которую вы можете предложить. Особенно если они читают книгу, которая, в общем, с глубокими эмоциональными переживаниями. Тема может быть совершенно разной, например, как бы вы поступили на месте этого героя, почему этот герой поступил так-то или так-то, в общем, и так далее. Таким образом, постоянно получая обратную связь от своих студентов и устанавливая сроки, на мой взгляд, внеклассное чтение может принести максимум результатов. У меня все. Пожалуйста, задавайте мне вопросы. На этом слайде вы видите мои контактные данные. Еще раз хочу повторить, что я физически нахожусь в Санкт-Петербурге. Здесь есть мой мобильный телефон и электронный адрес. Буду рада ответить на ваши вопросы. Спасибо.
Yeah, thank you, Elena, for your talk. Yeah, useful talk. And yeah, choosing a book for extensive reading is always a real quest. Yeah, and well, anyway, when we can do this, then our lessons become much more effective. And also, yeah, well, be aware of this fact that your learning experience, your personal preferences may affect your teaching experience. Yeah, so that's why, yeah, so we should first identify students' needs, their interests, and then we can, well, not even recommend a book, but guide them towards choosing their own book. Yeah, so that's why.
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Elena, can you please then write in the chat box your contact details?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, very good. So thanks a lot. And then let's move on. And a cherry on top of our today's conference is our fantastic guest presenting, well, at our ONARA conference for the first time. This is Joe Tomlinson. Hello, Joe. Yeah, I'm very, very glad to see you.
Hello.
Yeah, Joe Tomlinson has co-written a number of books and courses on IELTS and IELTS Target English, which specializes in content development and testing. She has a number of years experience in teaching and testing and has worked with Collins publisher for many years, co-authoring Collins Listening for IELTS, Get Ready for IELTS Writing, academic lectures, and IELTS preparation and practice. Well, great. So Joe is going to talk about independent learning and IELTS. Joe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for staying with me. I know that you've had a day full of talks, so it's a pleasure that some of you have stayed to listen to me talk about independent learning and IELTS. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think it's important for an IELTS student to be an independent learner. We're going to look at ideas, definitions of independent learning. I'm going to show you some snippets from the Collins books as well, which are really, really useful for independent learning. And lastly, we're going to look at a couple of scenarios of how you can incorporate, if you don't already, independent learning into your classes. Now, before I do that, I'm going to set up my presentation, so there will be a little bit of silence while I do that. Bear with me. It will happen one day. Here we go. Let me start this. And hopefully, fingers crossed, magic of technology, you can see my first question for you, which really is, what does independent learning mean to you? What do you think it is, basically? I'm going to open the chat. Obviously, you don't have to speak, but if you can type in your ideas, I'm going to just give you a minute to give me your ideas. Thank you. Great, I can see the first one. Thank you for going first, always very brave. Yep, speaking clubs, watching films with subtitles, doing that on their own. Brilliant, excellent. Absolutely, Lisa. Using life opportunities, identifying opportunities and taking them. Yes, 100%. Yes, learning for your own pleasure, which is sometimes difficult, I think, for IELTS students, because a lot of students see it as a barrier more than as a lifelong skill to have English abilities, to research, things like that. But absolutely. Okay, guys, well, let's have a look at some of my ideas. So, I think independent learning is about learners having ownership and control over their own learning. After all, it is theirs. They are the one that has to do it. They are the one that benefit from it. To be able to think and act autonomously, possibly with the guidance of us, the teacher, but to be free and confident to decide, I think is really important. To make informed choices and take responsibility for your learning activities. I think the key here is informed, to make choices, but to know about quality and why some things are good for you and why other things are, quite frankly, a waste of time. And I'm sure we all have some students who delve into something and spend hours there when really they need to focus, become more informed, take more responsibility, think about their timings. And lastly, be an active learner. And I think this is something that is extremely important. I've taught a variety of students from all around the world, and I think it depends on the personality type. Some people are just more relaxed, they want it fed to them. Other people want to learn, they want that knowledge. And I think encouraging that desire to do things for themselves is a really positive thing. And I'm not just the only person who thinks that. I've got a quote from the Irish poet, W.B. Yeats. Education is not the filling of a pot, but the lighting of a fire. So it's to get that interest and ability to control and develop your own knowledge. And this is not something that just I and W.B. Yeats think. It's also something that is really, really key in UK universities. I've just finished a pre-sessional, which is essentially a kind of a short 8-week course for people going on to university in the UK. And the focus, one of the key focuses, is on independent learning and critical thinking. It's an incredibly important part of the education system in the UK, especially at university. And quite often, it's a real surprise, even for UK students, because we go through the education system, primary school, secondary school, and everything is spoon-fed to us, and we We have to learn a specific way, and our teachers guide us through everything. Then we go to university and it completely changes. All of a sudden, we're in control of our own learning. And this is desired by the universities. And here's just a couple of snippets from university websites. The first one here is the University of Bristol. And as you can see, independent learning is a central part of being a student. It will challenge your motivation and dedication while developing your organizational and time management skills, those essential autonomous skills. And it's not just Bristol, Nottingham, the same. Independent learning is about taking control of your work. It's about deciding what you need to know and deciding how you're going to study. And last but not least, Reading, with this giant quote. Have a quick read. Now, I think this is my favorite, to be honest with you, because I think it's quite important for us to define what independent learning is not. And it's not letting that student go off alone to make mistakes and never return to us. That would be a disaster. But it's about, as it says at the end here, planning your own research. And in this way, we can think of IELTS as planning your own development, selecting, evaluating your own materials to your needs, and making your own mind up about what you learn and whether it's from your reading or your tutors. And I think this is quite important. It's about making your own mind up, being able to evaluate your path and the materials you're using. So that's a brief overview of independent learning. It might look a little vague now with the scenarios, with the examples. I think we'll see something really concrete at the end. But thinking about this, your students working alone to improve, your students evaluating materials to use, guiding their own study, I have a question. What do your students think about independent learning? So guiding their own study, deciding on their materials, etc. What's independent learning? Is that what they think? Do they have no idea? I don't know how to do it. Does it worry them, the idea of going out on their own to improve some areas? I don't like it, and I don't see why I should do it. So are they completely against the idea of independent learning? I love learning by myself. Do they actually enjoy it? Is it something they want to do? Or do they have the attitude that my teacher should teach me everything I need to learn, and everything outside, it's not for them? You guide them 100%. What do your students think of it? In the chat, if you've got any ideas, let me know. I hope you can all see the chat too. Okay, so some of the ideas we've got is that they want help and support. They find it time consuming. They think that you should tell them everything that they need to know. And then sometimes they do it, but sometimes they're quite overwhelmed by the idea. Yes, I mean, it's a lot to do. I agree. Absolutely. So it's something that culturally perhaps is not something you're used to. Any other ideas? So anyway, no more ideas at the moment, but what I'm seeing is that in general, the students look at it quite negatively. Yeah, they don't like it, they're suspicious of it. They think you should be giving them all the information they need, but they do like to be given a choice. Excellent. Okay, so overwhelmingly, the impression is not positive for students, and we're going to look at how we deal with that. Now, sorry, my presentation stopped. Excellent. What do you think about independent learning as the teacher? I've got options for you. They're quite recognizable. What's independent learning? I don't know how to do it, and that's completely normal. It's too much to manage. I can't control what my students are learning. Or I should explain everything to my students or they won't feel I am teaching them. Again, in the chat, share with me what you think. How do you feel about independent learning? Excellent. Yeah, it's exciting. It is a big responsibility. It is a challenge, but it can be really useful. And again, we're going to go on to look at that. For them, it's too much to manage. Right. Yeah, as Larissa said at the top there, it's great if it's properly guided. And hopefully in the scenarios, we're going to outline and discuss a little how it can be properly guided. Any other ideas? Yeah. Great point. I'm so sorry, your name is in Russian and I don't speak Russian, but whoever just wrote that last point, it's amazing. Students would like to choose from a range of things, but they aren't sure what they really need. And I think this is so true. I'm a language learner myself, and I know you guys have been. And sometimes, thank you, Gulnara, sometimes you find you're progressing and you roughly know your level, but you don't know what you need, and it's frustrating. And you need a teacher to tell you what you need. And we're going to absolutely look at how that's one of our fundamental jobs in independent learning. Great ideas, great ideas. Okay, so we're a little unsure, they're a little unsure, the students. Let's look at some of the pros and cons of it. So, should we encourage independent learning in our IELTS classroom? Here are my answers. I've got a yes and a no, so I like to think of myself as objective here. Firstly, yes, it can give learners useful skills for the future. So what do I mean by that? I mean all of these skills. So decision-making skills, evaluation skills, They can evaluate options, materials, choices, and make informed, educated, rather than just gut decisions. And I think if we think about how that can help them in their future life, actually, it can help them quite a lot, especially for management roles. Yeah. Critical thinking. So they don't just believe everything, they ask questions of it. A useful skill when evaluating materials or decisions that they may go on to make. And independence. So independent learning helps them not just rely on the decisions of others, but make their own decision. So kind of independent learning has a lot to do with being autonomous in careers, in life. It can give them quite a few soft skills for the future. My next yes is it can build confidence in the learner's own abilities. Now, to highlight what I mean by this, I've got a couple of pictures of students. It's a little bit of a stereotype, but I think you will see what I mean. So I don't think it's hard to work out that the student on the left is a stereotypical student who doesn't independently learn. They sat there on their own. They don't know what to do next. Their teacher didn't teach them this. It's too hard for me. I don't have the answers. And then my stereotypical independent learner is on the right with some questions where they're actually not just looking at the problems and facing a brick wall, but thinking of solutions too. So I should practice more of these question types. Oh, I haven't learned this yet. This is hard, so I should think about why and find materials to help. I can find the answers, or I can find answers. Just for now, I would like you to think about your own students. You don't need to put it in the chat this time, but I just want you to think, are your students generally, so more or less, more that student on the left who is being guided all the time, or the student on the right who is finding the answers themselves? Just have a think to yourself. You don't need to write in the chat. So it's tricky. You may think your students are already the students on the right, in which case, congratulations, tell me how you did it. Or you may think your students are more those students on the left. But I think if we as teachers can get our students from that student on the left to become some way towards the student on the right, I think we're doing a really good job. Because I believe our job is not just to teach, it's to give tools and to enable our students. And later we're going to look at some examples of how we can try and do this. But let's look at some other positives. This probably is a fundamental one related to IELTS, and it's learners can focus on targeted improvement in exam skills. So this is important if we want our IELTS students to improve more rapidly. Now, I say that from an opinion point of view. No research has been done into this yet that I know of, but I think it makes sense. Now, what do I mean? Imagine your first student, student one, has great listening skills, great reading skills, but their productive skills, especially in writing, are weaker. And student two has brilliant reading and writing skills, but their listening and speaking skills are weaker. Student three, great speaker. We've always got one or two of those in the class. Listening's quite good, but reading and writing are weaker. Student four, great at listening, speaking, reading, not so good at writing. Student five really needs to practice speaking and writing. And student six really needs to practice speaking and listening. Well, this is easy in the same classroom, isn't it? This might not be such a big difference for you, but the difference might be in the grammatical support they need, or the level your students are at, or the certain skills versus grammar they have. I think we can all think about how our students have different needs, and especially in relation to IELTS. Just have a think of one of your classes and what varying pattern of needs they might have. Just have a think about that, because it's a challenge for us. Oh, that's a good question, and I will come back to that. Just looked at the chat. I can't have the chat on and the presentation. What do we do when we've got this kind of profile? How do we deal with it? Sometimes it makes our class look quite even-handed. What else can we do? We've got all these different things, and we can't become 6 teachers to deal with each student. So we give everyone a little bit of what they need. This might be, if you've got lower level students, this might be grammar help. But other students might have better grammar, in which case, then you're juggling with grammar and IELTS, which, although are connected, it very much depends on your course, how much time they have, what they're doing. Yeah. So often we find ourselves torn in this kind of situation. And this is where some kind of independent learning outside the class can help us if we guide it. Because in that independent learning, if we know student one has a problem with writing, we can get them to focus on that outside of the class. And the same with student two, thinking about listening. The same with student three, thinking about writing or reading. 4 in writing, 5 in speaking, 6 in speaking. But we can focus their independent learning for what they need. And we know what they need. We are the teachers. In the same way, if you have lower level students and you know their grammar weaknesses or their vocabulary weaknesses, this is something you can highlight to them, and they can do this outside. And we're going to look at how you can do that, hopefully successfully as well, because I know that sometimes you can recommend a student does something, but it doesn't mean they do it. So we're going to address that too. But before we do that, let's look at the no's. So should we encourage independent learning in IELTS classes? Why would we say no? Well, I think the first reason is the learners won't like it and they won't do it. Tough. Okay. Yet again, I've got 2 images to explain the main problems here. We can see on the left, we've got a guy on his own, standing there at the edge of a cliff, looking around him, looking down and thinking, this is too much for me. I'm in a dangerous situation. And I think we can see that parallel with some students and independent learning. And on the bottom there, we've got the classic student reading a book or asleep under it. These are my two main points of students not liking it, not doing it. First one, obviously, it's scary. Yes, it is scary. How can we help with that? Well, firstly, we can tell the students what it means, how it can help them. So we can say to them, look, this can really address your specific problems. It's going to be really good for you, and how you will do it. So let them know exactly the process you're going to take. We can also make sure we structure the independent learning. Okay, look at the man in the cliff there. We wouldn't want him to jump, but if we provide the stairs, they better have a good railing. But if we provide the stairs, suddenly it's massively less scary than before. Suddenly he has a way through it to reach his destination. But what we're not going to do is lift him up and carry him down the stairs. We're going to just ensure that we are there to guide and support him or her. And the next one, I can't be bothered. Well, again, explain how it can help them specifically. Explain how it can contribute to their score improvement. Yeah. If you know they've got issues that they need to deal with outside the class and that can't have class time appointed to it, they need to deal with that in order to improve their score. More practice tests, more skills is not going to help someone who can't produce a tense correctly. Yeah. And make sure they are accountable for their learning. I think sometimes, and I imagine we all have those students where you give them something, and because we as teachers don't need to see it again, it disappears. And that's absolutely not what I recommend. We're going to look at how we can make students accountable for what they do in their independent study. Some of the questions I will deal with at the end, if that's okay. But I will deal with them. Okay, so that's the learners won't like it, won't do it. My next negative, it's difficult for teachers to set up and manage. I mean, this very much depends on the teacher. If you're a highly organized teacher, it's less difficult. If you're like me and not so well organized, it can be quite difficult at first. You have to get yourself into a routine, I definitely agree. But what can you do? Well, do not create work by sending students out to find their own resources. Use resources that are available to you and with answers. Nobody wants 25 students turning up on a Monday morning, all with different materials, all with questions, all with no answers, and suddenly you're bombarded. That is not independent learning. That is the last thing. As I said, we need to structure it. So make sure those resources are in a way listed, that they have that quality, that they're not just off on their own, finding things with no answers. Difficult to manage and set up? Well, we can set up a specific time to discuss what they've done independently and where they go next. Now, you can allocate some class time to this, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be 5-10 minutes at the end of the week. Keep a record of their progress. This could be in the form of a reflective diary, which is something I was using on the course that I just taught on, where students had to think about what problems they had, what they thought they needed, and how they could overcome them. Then they did the independent learning and wrote about how they felt about it. Did they feel a change? Very much depends on your students. Some students don't like that kind of reflective aspect, some do. Get students to recommend a resource activity they have used and that they can share with others. This kind of promotes independent learning, can be really useful. And probably the most important point, start small and then see how you can add to it. If you haven't done independent learning with your students yet, don't go all out trying to change everything. Just do it incrementally, bit by bit, and see if your students take to it or not. Won't hurt anyone and might benefit them a lot. And my last note, there aren't suitable resources for learners to use. Okay, well, you'll be surprised, but there are. There are lots of resources. I've got a few here: Grammar for IELTS, Vocabulary for IELTS, both Collins books. They're really useful, all of these books, in fact, because they're self-study. So the materials are written in a way for students to do them individually, and at the back of the books, they've got answer keys that explain why something is the answer, which I hope you'll agree is far better than just writing C, unlucky. Yeah, it explains why it's C. Of course, for grammar and vocabulary, there are other books that are IELTS focused that also cater for self-study, but with the skills a little less so. Writing for IELTS, speaking for IELTS, listening for IELTS, and reading for IELTS are all meant to be for the individual student studying alone. So they're completely different from the course book, where you've got discussions, group activities, etc. There's none of that. It's clear explanation, clear answer, and why. Yeah. Activities are generally very focused, and there's only a right or wrong. There's no kind of vagueness with it, because in self-study, that doesn't always work very well. So your resources for self-study should have clear explanations and keys, be of good quality. So this is my, this is a polite way of saying beware the internet sometimes, because the resources on the internet are not always good. They're not always typical of IELTS. I have spent years writing tests, and a lot of effort goes into assessment and item writing. I did my master's in language testing, so it's something I'm really, really interested in. And you can often find resources that people put up. The question quality is not as good as it could be, or it's a little vaguer. Sometimes the answers, you can question them, and rightly so. So think about the quality of your resources. That does not mean that all internet sources are bad, just that some are. Your self-study materials should be explicit in how they relate to their IELTS improvement. Or this is something that you can also explain. So you could give, for example, a self-study exercise on past tenses, for example. And you can just say to your student, this will help you when you're describing a graph in your IELTS task, writing task, yeah? So you can make that explicit to them, but they need to know how it's helping them with IELTS overall. And as well as including skills practice, of course, it needs to cater for grammar and vocabulary development, because all IELTS is essentially skills topping on what is essentially your grammar and vocab knowledge. Without that, you can't get a good score in any paper. So these are things that we need to think about with our materials. If your students are lower level, don't worry. There's a series by Collins, again, that's called Get ready for IELTS, and that starts at A2, A2+. So Get Ready for IELTS is for lower level students and can help those students who really aren't ready to take it yet, unless they're taking it to aim for about a 4 or a 5. But it's a good stepping stone onto the main books. How can these help you? Well, obviously they're IELTS books. This is a contents page from one of them. All of the themes are commonly found in IELTS. And that's the great thing about IELTS, actually, is that there are only so many themes that are included. I think when you look at the course books, generally they repeat the same things. It's the environment, it's health, it's education, it's crime, etc. Yeah. So it caters for all of those things. There are answer keys, audio scripts, very important. And the receptive skills start with language development. So with grammar and vocab building, we then look at skills for the exams and exam practice. And I'm just going to show you an example of that while I drink some water because my throat is going dry. So here we have something on process. Oh, let me go back. There we go. Process diagrams in listening for IELTS. Of course, I used my own one as an example. Have a look at the language preparation, task skills, and practice. Sorry. So I think we can see there that it builds up from language. We're looking at sequencing words, which really help with process diagrams in general. Then we look at ordering events, and we've got some exam tips. Look at the diagram, imagine how you describe it before you listen. And then we move on to a practice. So it's scaffolded in a way to build those students up to doing the exam task. And here we've got an example from speaking for IELTS with the language development, which moves into a practice. I'll give you a minute to look at that too. Now, I think this is really quite good because we've got some really good vocabulary here. And as Fiona, my co-writer, who I think is somewhere in this meeting, and I always say, part one of your speaking is the time where you can show off your language because the questions are easy. So you can produce quite a lot of nice vocabulary about yourself. And this comes through here with phrases such as look up to, fall out with, grow apart. looking at how you can take an adjective and add an adverb to make it more. So she's really outgoing. She's so nosy. So it's looking at building up the range of language for what should be the easiest part of the speaking. And then there's a practice at the end. Obviously, speaking practice is more difficult because essentially, you know, if the student is on their own, then how do they share it? But they can record it, they can share it in class, and they can also here compare to a sample answer. So have a look, and normally there's a tick list so they can see how well they've done or how well they've completed the task. Okay, so those are the materials. That's my should or should not list. And now we're going to look at some scenarios, starting with Nina. Read the scenario. What can Nina do? I just want you to take a minute to think about what Nina could do. You don't need to write, just think to yourself. Okay, I hope you've got some ideas in your head of how Nina can help her students to focus on their own weaknesses without increasing her workload significantly, which I think is important, and trying to engage the students. This is my idea of what she could do. So, firstly, she makes a habit of writing on their homework areas of improvement. And I think you can see my example here is future tenses written in red. Yeah. So just writing the area the student needs to improve at. It could be anything. Yeah. Could be timing, could be handwriting, could be grammar, could be vocabulary, could be task achievement, anything. She's made a list of resources that she thinks is good quality. And they all have answer keys, excellent. And the students have access to this resource list. So this access could be a physical copy or somewhere online, etc. Here's an example. So she's highlighting their weaknesses. She's scaffolding where they can do their independent learning. Imagine Nina has her class every day of the week. So she nominates Friday as her independent study catch-up day. In the first class, she asks students to look at their homework and note down 2 areas they need to improve. She tells them that she always marks these areas with an asterisk. She then tells her students to look at the resources list and find resources that can help them. As it's their first time, they can do this in class. This could be a case of photocopying the contents lists, bringing some of the books in, making sure they've got access to the internet, or doing it in the library, whatever is easiest. But they can work together in groups if they need to find the resources they think will tackle their problems. She then tells them to work on these areas in their own time during the week, using what they've nominated from the resource list. and that they'll be ready to talk about what they've done next Friday. And this is inserting the accountability into it. So Nina has been able to monitor the first time the students have done this to check they're looking at the right resources, that they know what they're doing. They go off with a list of what they need to do. They do it for the next week. And she gives them a self-study record to keep and bring in to each Friday class. Or if your students are particularly disorganized, you may have to keep that and they might have to photograph it. And that could look something like this. So the student name, the week, areas to improve, resources they're going to use, scores they've got, and any reflection. Here's a sample. So we can see the scores they've got, how they're reflecting on it, if they think they've done well enough, if they think they need more practice or not. In next Friday's class, Nina asks students to get out their self-study records and discuss them in groups. She asked them to share in the group what they needed to improve, what they did to try and improve, how well they did in the exercises, and what they need to do next. While they're doing this, she has a quick look at their homework records. In this way, she can check that they're doing what they're meant to be doing, but also they might feel that accountability from the other students, especially the students who have done some exercises and feel like they understand something a little more, so that they feel they can see that progress. And she repeats that process every Friday, and her students get used to it. Of course, if you've got an IELTS class once a week, this could be something you do monthly. But I suppose you also then need to think about rates of improvement, etc. So the benefits of this, as students become more aware of their strengths and weaknesses, absolutely, because they've got it on an asterisk all the time and they're working on them and they're seeing if they're getting good scores or not in the specific things they need. Nina feels that the IELTS development of her students is becoming more personalised. So they're getting all this group information in class, but outside they're getting a real personal service. And that is the guidance of their teacher to be able to work on their specific weaknesses alone. Students notice how much work others are doing and their improvement. So hopefully it could encourage more work. She can focus on teaching with less distraction, worry, and the students are accountable for their learning. Hopefully all very positive things. So Nina is kind of the starting point, I suppose, of what I consider independent learning and how it can really improve the IELTS student or the IELTS class. Now, let's look at Victor, who is a professional at this stuff. He's been doing it for a long time. Read the scenario. And have a think what Victor could do. Okay, so Victor's approach is different because his students are of a higher level, firstly, but also they have had some independent learning in the past. So they're kind of used to it. And Victor's also interested in the idea of task-based learning. Let's have a look at what he could do. Well, he decides to focus on a different task or question type, mainly listening and reading, because that's what they need, every Friday. He mixes his topics up so his students get variation. On Monday, imagine they have classes every day of the week. On Mondays, he gives them an outline of Friday's task. So for example, this Friday, it's a reading task, it's heading matching. The topic is obesity, and the text type, which is really important, I think, to add here, is problem and solution, because the text type can often tell you about the structure and the types of grammar that's going to occur in that text. So it's quite useful. And Victor's letting his students know that too. So he then asked the students to break down in groups what they need to study this week in order to do well at that specific task. And here we've got a kind of a mind map where they've got test-taking strategies, tips to approach the task, reading, how can we find answers quickly, what can they do, vocab, words connected to obesity health, academic general words, grammar, text type, modal verbs, perhaps describing data. So it's all about predicting what kinds of things they're going to be seeing in that text, and perhaps associated reading could help, other texts on similar areas. So basically it's like a plan to work out all the things they might need to do that task successfully. So with that, the students then discuss what areas they personally, individually need or think they're lacking and search for those areas. So perhaps one student says, oh, actually, I don't think my grammar and vocab's very good at this. And the teacher could say, yes, I think that's something you could perhaps work on. Somebody else says, I need the study skills, etc. So they decide what areas they specifically want to focus on individually. And they search for resources on those areas from books, internet sites that are acceptable. So I've got an example here, Collins Reading for IELTS. There's a reading on obesity. It's actually a table completion. So the students will know that the task type won't help them, but what they can mine that text for is vocabulary, yeah? And possibly look at the text function and see if it's similar. Is it a problem and solution? How is it presented? They can also look at the exam strategies for matching headings. So again, reading for IELTS, fine. This could be something that they find to use. Collins vocab for IELTS, they can look at health vocabulary, but if they think they want to look at something more specific, this is a perfect time to look at the internet and find articles on obesity. This one is general facts about obesity, but they know they're doing a problem and solution. So why aren't they looking for solutions to obesity? Get their searching to be exactly what they're going to do, exactly that text type. You know, what problems, what health problems happen or occur from obesity? How can they be solved? So here, how to prevent obesity in kids and adults. Can we stop the obesity epidemic? All great resources to mine for vocabulary and for grammar, possibly. After that, they work on those areas on their own. They make notes, go to class on Thursday with it. They share what they've learned on Thursday. This can be as brief or as long as you would like it to be. But they don't just explain the information, they read others' learning so that although they've learned in depth what they think they need, they're also learning a little from the others. And that can be a class discussion there. Students do the task on Friday and then reflect on how their study has helped them do that task. What exactly were the benefits of it? And I think they will have a few. And the overall benefits in the long term, students become more task focused, really important with IELTS because they're doing tasks, and they develop approaches to tackle them. Their knowledge can be built, they can keep it in a folder if you're super organized, and they can look up that same information for repeated tasks, etc. They can build vocab folders. Students notice how their work feeds into their task success. I think that's really important. And the students don't just rely on the teacher or themselves, they develop teamwork. Those are my benefits for it. Two very brief scenarios because I realize I'm running out of time. I have a final question for you to reflect upon, actually, and it's what steps could you take to foster some independent learning in your IELTS class? Would you like to try it? Why or why not? I recommend it, but there are many different ways to teach. So just because I recommend it doesn't mean everyone must do it. I do hope you've enjoyed my talk though. I'm going to take some questions in a minute. Here is my email address. If you have any questions, please in English. And the information for Collins is down below too. I'm going to quickly go to the chat and see what questions I've got. If you've got a question, we've got a couple more minutes. So if you do have a question, type now quickly and I will deal with it. If a student doesn't have basic general knowledge of English, how can they consider independent learning? Okay, I think it has to be structured very carefully with very, very low level students. I would recommend doing different activities with answer keys, but from lower level books, and in a way, a little more structured even than Nina's example, okay? So if you're talking about, for example, A2 level students, you could do something on essay writing, but an A2 level student doing an essay is already quite a challenge, shall I say. So I think what you'd need to look at specifically is when you get their essays, what are those specific weaknesses in those students' writing? And you could focus, for example, on grammar 1 week and mark their grammar on their writing. You know, okay, so you need to work on subject, verb, object, or sentence structure, or adjectives, or basic parts of speech. That could be done, and you could focus all together on their specific grammar and do that, but just pare it down, absolutely. Do you think it's better to divide students into groups according to their level of knowledge, or to have mixed ability classes? I think it's better to have them in groups according to their level of knowledge, quite frankly. I think the more similar you can get a group, the easier it can be. I don't think there's any different. There are lots of mixed ability classes, but then there's a lot of juggling and catching up to be done. And you end up where you've got, for example, the graph I did of reading, listening, writing, speaking, and you're spreading yourself like that. You are spreading yourself even wider because you're spreading yourself with skills and with levels, and that's more difficult. So I would recommend definitely having similar levels at least. Absolutely, I think you're right. If students really want to improve their skills and pass the exam and go on to be able to actually be independent, be autonomous, have really good evaluative decision-making skills, it's a benefit, absolutely. If there's no more questions, then thank you so much for listening to me at the end of a long day. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sorry I'm just in my office here and not with you because I would love to meet you all. I hope you've enjoyed my talk. If you do have any questions, please contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, very much. Thank you for this exciting, really exciting session. And
Pleasure.
I think that all the teachers have a lot of takeaways from your session. And especially, many thanks for the Nina and Victor scenarios. Poor Nina, poor Victor, but finally they've got the solutions. Yes, so it's really great. Yeah, thank you very, very much. Yeah, so dear colleagues, thank you for taking part in our big conference and the conference Books for School. 2 days of insightful presentations, fantastic speakers, and a lot of takeaways. And well, thank you for the good vibes and your active participation, your comments, your responses. Well, it's just the beginning of the academic year, and we are planning a lot more events this year so that you can really have a lot of discoveries. So keep in touch and enjoy your lessons. Thank you very much. Goodbye.